Welcome to SalonEra, a salon experience for the 21st century that brings together artists and audiences for music and conversation. Produced remotely, SalonEra is not subject to geographic or programming limitations, and that means that every episode is full of different artists, different music, and spontaneous conversation. We'd love to see and feel your encouragement or applause, so feel free to engage in the chat at any time. We also look forward to responding to your thoughts and comments when we go live for the Q&A following this broadcast. We'd also like you to have the best possible experience watching SalonEra, so we recommend that you check your settings on YouTube or on Facebook to ensure that you're watching in the highest quality. Feel free to visit our website for more ideas on optimizing your settings. We are creating new opportunities for artists to collaborate, and we're bringing our work and our passions into your home. While SalonEra is free to watch, I urge you to consider making a donation. Your support compensates our participating artists whose livelihoods have been so deeply affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Thanks for watching and enjoy the show.
Spendet uns Blumen zum Prinze, Bartuschen will, leis aus der Tür und fliegen zum prächtigen Tanze. Ein schwarzer Bock, ein Besenstock, die Ofengabel, die Wogen, reißt uns geschwind wie Blitz und Wind durch sausende Lüfte zum Glocken, reißt uns geschwind wie Blitz und Wind durch sausende Lüfte zum Glocken. Bub tanzt unser Trupp und küsst in die grelligen Hände. Ein leiser Schwarm fasst um mein Arm und schwinget im Tanz in die Brände. Und wird der Bub verheißt den Trupp, der tanzenden Gaben auf Gaben. Sie sollen scheinen Seide gehen und die Töpfe vor Gold sich gräben. Sie sollen scheinen Seide gehen und Töpfe vor Gold sich gräben. Drach und flieget das Dach und bringet uns Butter und Eier. Die Nachbarn dann sehen die Funken wehen und schlagen ein Kreuz vor den Feuer. Die Schwalbe fliegt, der Frühling sieht, die Blumen erblühen zum Kranze. Bartuschen wir leis aus der Tür, Bartuschen wir leis aus der Tür. Juhu, das vom prächtigen Tanze. Bartuschen wir leis aus der Tür, Bartuschen wir leis aus der Tür. Juhu, zum prächtigen Tanze. Juhu, 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 zum prächtigen Tanze.
Tonight, we are thrilled to cap off Bewitched, Les Délices' first concert of our 2021 season, with a special evening of songs infused with the supernatural and premiered in the shadow of Halloween. Bewitched saw us explore the stories of Medea and Circe, fearsome yet beguiling enchantresses from antiquity who are outsiders among the gods. Tonight's Schubertiade picks up many of the same themes, but the song we just heard, Hexenlied by Felix Mendelssohn, is an ecstatic celebration of female power and community with ritualistic images of witches dancing, flying through the air, and communing with the devil. Musicologist Francesca Brittan lends her insights on the sonic histories of magic and supernaturalism to our conversation tonight, as we hear from three fabulous singers, soprano Hannah DePriest, tenor Karim Sulayman, and baritone Jonathan Woody, all accompanied by fortepianist Michael Pecak. Francesca Brittan joins us from Cleveland, Ohio. Michael Pecak and Hannah DePriest are in Chicago, and Jonathan Woody is in Brooklyn, New York. Karim Sulayman recorded this episode with us from the UK. Good evening, everyone. It's such a pleasure to have you here for our Schubertiade. Of course, those are musical evenings to be shared in good company. And I'm thrilled to have you here, and also very excited to introduce Francesca Brittan, who thought it would be a great idea to open this evening with a discussion of what a Schubertiade is.
Sure, and if you have an image at your disposal, you can show it. So a Schubertiade is a musical party. Imagine if you texted your 30 closest friends, including fellow composers, singers, patrons, neighbors, and said to them, hey, I have some new songs. Why don't you come over and we can sit around and hear them? This is exactly how this worked, starting in the mid-1820s for Schubert. And his songs were all premiered in this setting. They were not heard on concert stages, and often they were sung by amateurs. Schubert himself played the piano. He was an amateur pianist. And in this case, a number of the figures in this painting by Moritz von Schwind, who himself was in attendance at a lot of these events, are recognizable. So Josef von Schwan is in this painting, who was a government official and an early supporter of Schubert. Franz von Schobert, who was a poet and a bad boy. He was kind of a libertine. He did all kinds of naughty things. And he also persuaded Schubert to do some naughty things. The painter Leopold Kupelwieser was here, the Countess Caroline Esterhazy. So this was a pretty lettered gathering. You can see Schubert here with his little glasses at the piano. And obviously, he's not playing a grand piano. He's playing what's called a square piano, even more modest than the instrument that Michael was just playing. So, this is a domestic music-making event. The singer is seated. Johann Michael Vogel, well-known baritone at the Vienna Court Opera, a frequent performer of Schubert's songs. And the atmosphere was informal. People are cheek to cheek, elbow to elbow, pressed right up against the performers. There's no sense of distance here between the people doing the playing and the people listening. And apparently there was all kinds of improvisation. Schubert was improvising preludes and postludes. Vogel was adding ornamentation and embellishment all over the place. Sometimes this didn't work well, sometimes it did. And the people in the audience here are sort of staring off into the middle distance. They're not looking at the performers. There's no sense of spectatorship like that. Instead, von Schwind is imagining here a romantic ideal of listening. So you're transported to some sort of metaphysical or other space or an inner domain of expressivity and emotion. And for the Romantics, that's what a Schubertiade and that's what music in general was supposed to do. So it's a far cry from, the kind of audience performer separation and the formal settings in which you hear Lieder today. And I'm just delighted to be in this informal space here, which is very close to, I think, how it would have felt to be out in these events. And by the way, even though it looks like everyone's behaving themselves now, about 10 minutes after the music was over, there was copious drinking, eating, and dancing till 2 or 3 in the morning. And there are lots of wonderful accounts of this. And I think we should do that too.
Sign me up.
Yeah.
That sounds great. And that sounds so celebratory. And I love the informality and, as you say, cheek to cheek, which is hard to imagine just at this very moment. But the kind of very personal and inner exploration is something, I think, a theme that will come up over and over in the songs that we are listening to and talking about this evening. And so, Jonathan, I hope that you might introduce for us our next song, which is Prometheus by Schubert.
Sure. And hi. I should say the piece tells the story of the Greek mythological character of Prometheus, who was one of the Titans and who is most well known, I think, today for the gift of sort of stealing fire from Mount Olympus and bringing it to humanity and sharing it with human beings. There are other versions of the myth where he has crafted humanity itself out of clay And then, of course, his punishment for doing such a thing is to be strapped to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains and to have an eagle eat his liver every day, which then regenerates. So, that delightful, sort of horrific, gory punishment that the Greek gods like to mete out. And as I was doing a little bit of research to learn more about the song, what I found really interesting was that these ideas of the gift of fire, or the gift of technology, we might even say, being given to human beings and stolen from the gods to do so, is actually very universal. It's not just ancient Greek. You see similar myths in Central Asia, you see similar myths in the East. And so it's just really interesting that that's how we think of our technological developments as sort of being stolen from some greater knowledge that we maybe weren't supposed to have access to. And so in the Goethe setting of the story, which is then set by Schubert, there is definitely an angle of almost defiance or anger with the deities that would otherwise have withheld these gifts to humanity. So the speaker, the singer, is in Prometheus's voice and offers really an excoriation of the gods, saying, "What have you ever done for me? You've deceived me. What we've achieved as human beings has come from our great spirit, and not from something that you gave or didn't give to us." So I think that's just very interesting, and it reflects, I think, a little bit of the romantic ideas that Francesca was just mentioning.
I agree with you. I think that the piece is fascinating. I love the different characters that come across in the piece, and there's this amazing way in which Prometheus, who's a Titan, is almost humanized. It becomes almost a sympathetic character for us. So I'd love to listen and then talk a little bit more about it.
Sounds great.
Bedecket einen Himmel Zeus mit Wolkendunst. Und über dem Knaben gleich ihr Disteln köpft. Anheichen dich und musst mir meine Erde noch lassen stehen und meine Hütte, die du nicht gebaut, und meinen Herd, um dessen Blut du mich beneidest. Ich kenne nichts Ärmeres unter der Sonne als euch, Götter. Ihr nährt kümmerlich von Opfersteuern und Gebiet auf eure Majestät. Habtet, wären nicht Kinder und Bettler hoffnungsvolle Toren. Da ich ein Kind war, nicht wusste, wo aus noch ein, kehrt ich mein verirrtes Auge zur Sonne, als wenn drüber wär ein Ohr zu hören meine Klage. Ein Herz wie meins sich des Bedrängten zu erbarmen. Wer half mir wider der Titanen Übermut? Wer rettete vom Tode mich, vom Sklaverei? Hast du nicht alles selbst vollendet, heilig glühend Herz, und glühtest jung und gut, betrogen, Rettungsdank, dem Schlafenden adroben. Ich dich ehren, wofür? Hast du die Schmerzen gelindert, je des Beladenen? Ich dich ehren, wofür? Hast du die Tränen gestillt, je des Geängsteten? Hat mich nicht zum Mahne geschmiedet die allmächtige Zeit und das ewige Schicksal, meine Herren und deine? Wähntest du etwa, ich sollte das Leben hassen, in Wüsten fliehen, weil nicht alle blutend Träume reiften? Hier sitz ich, armer Mensch, nach meinem Bilde, ein Geschlecht, das mir gleich sei, zu leiden, zu weinen, zu genießen und zu freuen sich, und dein nicht zu achten, wie ich. Dein nicht zu achten, wie ich.
We have such a strong sense in that amazing song of suffering and anguish, and yet the great creativity, in a sense, that Prometheus embodies, and whether or not he created man, but certainly emboldening them and empowering them with fire. Fran, what are your thoughts about Prometheus?
Yeah. First of all, what a great performance. I'm thrilled to hear that. I'm feeling ecstatic right now. I feel like Prometheus. No, I mean, this song, Prometheus, and the next one, Gretchen's Prayer, Gretchen's Bitte, these two together are a pretty good summing up of what we might think of as the romantic artist. So on one hand, the romantic artist is a revolutionary figure, right? Promethean, Napoleonic, forged in the fires of the French Revolution, racing out to like burn down the establishment, guillotine the king, destroy everything, throw out all the entrenched rules. And you really hear that in this song, you know, where, first of all, Schubert is clearly refusing to work in any given form. Sometimes when you're listening to this, you think, oh, it's a lead, it's a song. And then 1 minute later or 30 seconds later, you think, oh no, this must be an operatic scene. And then you think, oh no, this is a piece of recitative. And this is like a classic revolutionary moment. It's also chromatically unstable. Which key are we in? Where are we going? And this is just great, right? So that version of the Romantic Artist is the guy with a leather jacket riding a motorcycle and packing a semi-automatic. That's that guy, right? The other version of the Romantic Artist is pretty well summed up by the next song. Okay, so then we encounter Gretchen. Obviously, there's a gender thing here too, right? So Gretchen is a figure famously from part 1 of Goethe's Faust, which is, a rather Promethean tale about humans striving for knowledge and power and freedom. Gretchen is a victim of Faust's erotic appetite, right? She gets seduced and abandoned, but she's also a symbol of romantic torment, which was in many cases seen as the inevitable counterpart to romantic creation. So in order for men to create, women have to suffer. Gretchen describes the anguish in her heart, the ache in her bones, her endless fears and longings. And these are classic descriptions of the tormented artist and the wider idea, that art comes from suffering. There are no happy creators in Romanticism. And by the way, this is the version of the artist that we've inherited today, the pathological artist. This is everyone from Janis Joplin to Hendrix to Kurt Cobain. Like, these are all versions of the pathological artist. We love this. We want more of this. Yeah.
Hannah, I know from past conversations with you that Gretchen's Bitte is actually your favorite setting by Schubert of Gretchen's story. And why is that?
Yeah, so Schubert returns to Gretchen several times over the course of his very short life. And in his output, I guess the most famous would be Gretchen am Spinnrade, the very famous with the tumultuous spinning wheel and the piano part. But this setting, which is actually a fragment, it's not finished. Michael and I did our darndest to make that final cadence feel final, but there's no double bar there. We're not sure if Schubert was thinking that this would be maybe just a longer song or maybe part of a longer work like a Shepherd on the Rock sort of thing, or maybe it was a sketch for an opera. We don't know, because we know that he was interested in writing an opera. He just didn't have the time. And we also, pretty sure that Faust would have been a pretty logical choice for him for all the reasons that Francesca so elegantly and eloquently laid out. And there's something about Gretchen's Bitte, like the Prometheus that Jonathan so brilliantly sang remotely, where there's this slippage in it, and it has the intimacy of an art song, but there's so much grandeur and there's so much vocally that feels very operatic. So it's like the best of both worlds, and you're being pulled in these two different directions. Like, you're on stage, but you're also very intimately, praying in front of the Virgin Mary. And I love that Schubert is so good at giving you both of those very different kinds of expression at the same time.
Let's listen to Gretchen's Bitte.
Das schwirrt mir im Herzen mit tausend Schmerzen, blickst auf zu deines Sohnes Tod. der Schmerz mir im Gebein, was mein armes Herz hier banget, was es zittert, was verlanget, weißt nur du allein, weißt nur du allein. Wohin ich immer gehe, wohin ich immer gehe, wie weh, wie weh, wie weh wird mir im Busen hier. Ich bin, ach kaum, alleiner. Ich wein, ich wein, ich weine. Das Herz zerbricht in mir. Ich wein, ich wein, ich weine. Das Herz zerbricht in mir.
Hannah, thank you, and Michael, thank you so much for that beautiful performance. I did not know this song, and I completely hear what you mean by this kind of operatic quality. Indeed.
It's a great song. More people should know it.
Well, for this kind of Halloween-inspired episode, it seemed really obvious to do one of the most famous Schubert songs, Der Erlkönig. But one of the, I think, really fun and interesting things that we wanted to do, especially with the group of singers that we had, was to contrast two different settings of the same text. But I thought we might talk a little bit first about Der Erlkönig and who this character, who's maybe not such an important part of our cultural imagination at this moment, who he is.
The Erlkönig has a long and interesting history. And this is, first of all, certainly Schubert's most famous song. It was his most famous song in his lifetime, and I think for a lot of people, this is also the song they know and love. It's also a very creepy song for a number of different reasons. I can tell you that the story comes from Scandinavian legend, from Danish legend. And in Danish legend, the story of the Erlkönig is not about the Erlkönig, it's about his daughter. And the daughter is a malevolent spirit who waylays male travelers, asks them to dance, seduces them, and kills them. She's a kind of siren. However, when the Erlkönig story arrives in Germany via Herder and then Goethe, there's a gender switch that happens. So suddenly, the story is no longer about the Erlkönig's daughter, it's about the Erlkönig himself, who seduces or tries to seduce a male child, a boy, and eventually kills him. So for this reason and many other reasons, Schubert's setting of the song was hugely controversial. At least 30 settings followed by other composers. All of them are essentially pieces of Schubert reception history. That's the topic for another time or class. And there were also an enormous number of lithographs and paintings. And why don't you show everyone, again, Moritz von Schwinn's painting of the Erlkönig, and I can tell you how this story unfolds. So Schubert's song is set as a ballad, which means there are several characters, each with a separate voice. In this case, a narrator, a father, a son, and the Erlkönig. So here's the plot. There's a father. He's riding through the forest at night. There's a storm. He's trying to outpace the storm. He holds his son in his arms to keep him warm. And we learn all of this backstory by hearing the narrator in the opening of the song. We also understand it because we hear in the piano part racing triplets and a repeated kind of agitated figure. So this is the galloping of the horse, the whipping of the winds. So as this journey unfolds, the son begins to see the ghostly form of the Erlkönig lurking around the trees, and he can also sort of see the Erlkönig's daughters dancing there. You can see them in the painting. And he says to his father, "Don't you see the Erlkönig? Don't you see his crown and his train and his robes?" And when he speaks, his voice is obviously much higher than the father's because he's young, and also he's afraid. And the father, who represents the domain of reality and reason, says, "Oh no, there is no Erlkönig. It's just a streak of mist. It's just the rustling of the wind." And you'll hear when the father comes in that his voice is low and reasonable. And it's not very song-like, it's speech-like. So in the domain of logos, for the Romantics lies reason, right? So, of course, there is an Erlkönig now. And he comes closer and closer to the boy. He promises him toys and dancing and singing. And when he speaks, the galloping figure of the horse goes away, and the repeating figures go away, and the harmony shifts into the major mode and becomes static. It doesn't go anywhere. We also move into a very quiet world, a pianissimo world, as though the Erlkönig is speaking to us from very far away. So this is clearly the world of seductive melody, the world of magic, and it's a wonderful place. But of course, the boy resists the Erlkönig, and every time he comes in the song, his vocal entry is higher because he's more and more afraid. The Erlkönig is coming closer and closer. And finally, the Erlkönig says to him, "I love you. And if you don't come with me, I will take you by force." And the boy cries out to the father, "The Erlkönig is hurting me." But it's too late. The father doesn't believe him. And when he arrives home, he finds that the boy is dead. So, as I said, this is a very creepy song, and there are lots of ways of understanding this. There's a mountain of wonderful criticism about this song, dating right back to the 19th century. One of the ways to think about it is to contemplate the relationship between reality and the imagination. So, just very briefly, one of the defining features of Romanticism is the rejection of cultures of reason. The Romantics are tired of the Enlightenment. They're tired of the marginalization of things like metaphysics, magic, intuition, dream. And they argue that anyway, a focus on pure reason is not a good representation of life, like of the human existence, of the human consciousness. And that reason was going to have to start recognizing magic. So in Kantian terms, we might argue that they wanted a joining of the physical, the phenomenal world with the noumenal world, the world of imagination, of things unseen. And this is a song where that happens. Fantasy and reality collide here. The Erlkönig turns out to be real. And the reason represented by the father is proven to be insufficient and ultimately fatal. So the song is a commentary on Romantic philosophy. Of course, it's also a disturbing representation of pedophilia, sexual repression, which has been linked by some critics to Schubert's own grappling with his homosexuality.
Wow. It's extremely rich. Just because you mentioned that all these subsequent settings of the Erlkönig are essentially pieces of Schubert reception history, I wondered if you could talk to us a little bit about the Löwe setting of the Erlkönig, which is what we're going to hear first.
Yes, for sure. So Löwe wrote his setting in 1818. Schubert wrote his in 1815. And Löwe claimed for his entire career that he was uninfluenced by Schubert. But I think you're going to hear when the performance happens that this is just not true, right? His setting is clearly indebted to Schubert, as was every setting of the Erlkönig through the next 50 years and on into our own time. There are some wonderful heavy metal settings of this song. And anyway, I'm not going to talk about those. So the take home here is that Löwe also sets his song in G minor. That's not an accident. And you get a repeating kind of jangling dissonant figure in the piano. Also, he stays with the minor mode for the entries of the father and the son. However, when the Erlkönig enters, we have the same mechanism that Schubert uses. We shift into the major mode. We get a series of static harmonies. We're in a kind of a pianissimo floating world. And then crucially, when the Erlkönig breaks through from the realm of the imaginary into the realm of the real, there is the same shift, a famous shift that Schubert uses, where the Erlkönig breaks out of the major mode into the minor mode of the father, of reality. you're going to hear exactly the same shift. So there are also differences. There are differences in the presentation of the characters and so forth, but there are many more similarities. And what that tells us, I think, is just that Schubert's song was a powerful and influential setting.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's also interesting, I think, to think about how as you mentioned, the accompanimental textures change even with the setting of similar text, and of course there's an indebtedness one to the other. But I was wondering, Michael, as an accompanist of all these songs, actually with the exception this evening of Schubert's Erlkönig, which though I know you've played many times, I wonder for you what the experience is like of playing different accompaniments to the same text.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, for me, something that's always at the fore of my mind as I'm preparing any song, really, I mean, every composer has his or her own tone that they create. Not only a tone as a composer, but also a tone that they create in specific pieces. And for me, the challenge first lies in trying to understand and capture that tone or that spirit or that world that the composer is creating in any given work. A lot of it comes, of course, from melodic turns of phrase or from the harmonic narrative that a composer writes. However, a lot of it also comes from the text itself. And for me personally, I draw a lot on the sensitivity of the singer's handling of the text. And I mean, to work with such fabulous and mindful and artful singers as we have here in these pieces, is just a really rich experience for me, because like I said, I really feed off of that energy and that sensitivity. And yeah, so I don't know. It's really just capturing these worlds. I mean, clearly, as Francesca and both you have said, I mean, the settings are similar. They are still somewhat different, though. I mean, the Schubert setting, of course, is famously agitated and capturing this kind of urgent madness of the whole scene that's depicted in that piece, whereas the Lova is, I would say, a little bit more atmospheric. With these constant tremolos that I play in between my hands and in the piano texture, but nonetheless these characters still have to come out one way or another. So I do incorporate a lot of pedal effects. I use the moderator pedal on my fortepiano to kind of change the voice of the Erlkönig when he comes in, especially in the Liva setting. And yeah, so really, it's capturing atmospheres, it's capturing characters. These are the things I'm thinking about, and creating these environments for the singers.
Great. I look forward to talking more about the art of accompaniment in a little while, and hopefully also in our Q&A. And for the moment, let's listen to these two settings of the Erlkönig back to back. We'll start with the Löwe, sung by Jonathan Woody, and then we'll return with Karim and talk about his performance of the Erlkönig by Schubert.
Reitet so spät durch Nacht und Wind. Es ist der Vater mit seinem Kind. Habt den Knaben wohl in dem Arm. Fasst ihn sicher, hält ihn warm. Fasst ihn sicher, hält ihn warm. Mein Sohn, was blickt du so bang dein Gesicht? Siehst Vater du den Erlkönig nicht, den Erlenkönig mit Kron und Schweif? Mein Sohn, das ist ein Nebelstreif. Das ist ein Nebelstreif. Komm, liebes Kind, komm, geh mit mir, gar schöne Spiele spiel ich mit dir. Manch bunte Blumen sind an dem Strand, meine Mutter hat manch gülden Gewand. mein Vater, und hörst du nicht, was Erlkönig mir leise verspricht? Sei ruhig, bleibe ruhig, mein Kind, in ihren Blättern seufzt der Wind, in ihren Blättern seufzt der Wind. Willst, feine Knabe, du mit mir gehen? Meine Töchter sollen dich warten schön. Meine Töchter führen die nächtlichen rein und wiegen und tanzen und singen dich heim. Mein Vater, und siehst du nicht dort Erlkönigs Töchter am düsteren Ort? Mein Sohn, ich seh es genau, es scheinen die alten Weiden grau, es scheinen die alten Weiden grau. Ich lieb dich, mich reizt deine schöne Gestalt, und bist du nicht willig, so brauch ich Gewalt. Mein Vater, jetzt fasst ihr mich an. Erlkönig hat mir ein Leid getan. Erlkönig hat mir ein Leid getan. Nimm wahr, du Grauset, ihr reitet geschwind. Ihr hält in den Armen das ächzende Kind. Ihr reicht den Hof mit Mühe und Not in seinen Armen. Das Kind war tot.
I hope you enjoyed the remote collaboration that we just heard, which was created especially for you, our audience at home, and for this episode. While recording remotely presents some unique challenges, we're so happy to be able to bring artists together for new collaborations and to share their fascinating and beautiful work. In this way, SalonEra supports working artists who have all been deeply affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll return to the show in a moment, but in the meantime, please consider supporting these artists and SalonEra with a donation.
Spiel ich mit dir, manch bunter Blumen
sind an dem Strand. Meine Mutter hat man Schüden gewandt. Mein Vater, und hörst du nicht, was Erlkönig mir leise verspricht? Sei ruhig, bleibe ruhig, mein Kind, in dürren Blättern säuselt der Wind. Willst, feiner Knabe, du mit mir gehen? Meine Töchter sollen dich warten schön. Meine Töchter führen den nächtlichen Rhein und fliegen und tanzen und singen dich ein. Sie fliegen und tanzen und singen dich ein. Mein Vater, und siehst du nicht dort Erlkönigstöchter am düstern Ort? Mein Sohn, ich sehe es genau, es scheinen die alten Weiden so grau. Ich liebe dich, mich reizt deine schöne Gestalt, und bist du nicht willig, so brauch ich Gewalt. Mein Vater, jetzt fasst mich an. Erlkönig hat mir ein Leids getan. Dem Vater Clausitz, reitet geschwind, hält in Armen das ächzende Kind. Erreicht den Hof mit Mühe und Not. In seinen Armen das Kind war tot.
Karim, I know this performance that we just heard, which is absolutely fabulous and so characterful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Was recorded during the recording sessions for your most recent CD, which we saw a little image of the cover just at the start of that. And you performed along with Yi-Heng Yang, a fantastic fortepianist. And I have to say that I have thoroughly enjoyed that disc in its entirety on several occasions.
Thank you.
And I know that singing Schubert is very meaningful for you.
It is. I'm not sure what else to say, but it certainly is. And I think there's something about Schubert that, thank you for your kind words, by the way. And there's something about Schubert that that Francesca was touching on with the Schubertiade that is accessible to everybody. And there's something for everybody in Schubert. And I think that's part of why I gravitate towards him. I think because we are given the opportunity with a composer like Schubert to make it our own as an individual, and because it's meant for amateurs or for professionals, because it's for everybody, that there's a way that we can then bring of ourselves to it. And that task is very appealing to me. And there's also this element of Schubert that I think has not been achieved since him in the same way, but that he was able to capture joy and sadness in one sound, in one moment, setting different texts to the same chords or the same sounds that I think creates magic when you listen to Schubert. And when you get into Schubert and interpret Schubert, it's a really magical thing that you can sing 4 verses of the same music and say completely different things from verse to verse to verse. And it seems to still make complete sense as if he was just setting the one verse. And it's this idea that he had the whole picture with one simple tune. And I think that's another thing that just fascinates me about him, and that brings me so much excitement to interpret him and to give him to other people through what I do with him.
Right. Your CD is, I think, like you're talking about the experience of singing Schubert, it's both has a universal appeal, but it's also deeply, deeply personal. And I understand that that you had a really strong kind of unifying theme in mind in developing that program.
Yeah. Well, we wanted to kind of address the moment of not and wildly enough, it seemed to the message of the album seemed to get strengthened in what's happening during the pandemic. But it was a moment that we're experiencing as we are connected so digitally, but feeling more and more separated from people. And really the overriding message of the album is to address depression and to address solitude and these deep feelings of sadness that people feel, that they often feel like they can't talk about, and to let you know that it's okay to feel sad, and that it is okay and normal to feel alone, and that there are ways out of darkness. It's mostly a night themed program that the moon and stars sort of act as benevolent guides to light our path and to hopefully light our way out. And but that's also to say that if we choose to stay in the darkness and we choose not to follow those pathways out, that's also okay. And that's part of being sad, is acknowledging that one is sad and hopefully finding ways out of that.
Do you have a favorite selection on the album?
I don't know. They're also, I mean, I wouldn't have done any of those songs if I didn't think they were all just brilliant and perfect in their own right. I do love the song from which I took the title. I love Das Fisches Liebesglück so much. And the title, Where Only Stars Can Hear Us, comes from a line of poetry from that song. And I think that song really taps into something magical, deeply personal, worldly, all the things of this world and beyond this world are in that song. And it's magic. And it's a purely strophic song, 4 verses, 7 minutes plus. And it just feels so immense and timeless and incredible. Yeah, so I have to say that's probably one of my favorite songs ever written by any composer, but maybe that's my favorite. I don't know. That's my favorite right now.
Well, the next song that we're going to hear is Der Leiermann, which is another really kind of magical, also deeply, deeply, deeply sad, strophic song. Do you have more to add about it, or should we?
It's funny. I don't think, yes, it's strophic, but I don't think, when I do that song, I don't think of it as strophic, which is interesting. I think of it. It is
for you.
Well, I think it stays in one place, and it's this arrival of meeting your end, I think, and meeting. It's so frozen in time, in space, and literally and figuratively. And so I think of it as just this one moment of ending. I don't know. That's just sort of how I look at it.
Well, you sing it so beautifully, so
Thanks.
I would love to hear Der Leiermann.
Thank you.
Drüben hinterm Dorfe steht ein Leiermann. Und Mit starren Fingern dreht was kann. Barfuß auf dem Eiser wankt hin und her. Und sein kleiner Teller bleibt ihm immer lieb. Und sein kleiner Teller bleibt ihm immer lieb. Keiner mag ihn hören, keiner sieht ihn an. Und die Hunde knurren den alten Mann. Und lässt es gehen, alles wie es will. Dreht und seiner Leier steht ihm nimmer still. Dreht und seiner Leier steht ihm nimmer still. Wunderlicher Alter, soll ich mit dir gehen? Willst zu meinen Liedern deiner Leier drehen?
Oh, what a great performance, Karim. I don't see you right now on the screen, but boy, you really froze my heart there. And I like that. I like Karim's description of this as a frozen song. Some people will know that this is the final song of a linked song cycle called Winterreise, which means Winter Journey, which was written in 1828, the year that Schubert died. And it tells the story of a young man who's had a summer romance, and the romance has failed. And so he goes back to the town where the romance unfolded obsessively and visits the house of the beloved, the tree where he had a picnic, the inn where they drank a beer, finally he succumbs to lovesickness and despair. And this is the final song. He's wandered to the outskirts of the town. There's nothing there. The houses peter out. It's just forest. And there's nobody but the old Leiermann. This is the only figure that he ever meets in the song. A Leiermann is an organ grinder. So this is someone who plays a clockwork instrument that you turn with a handle. This was an instrument that was associated with beggars or peasants. And an organ grinder can only play a few tunes. It's a clockwork instrument, that's all it can do. And that's what Schubert is doing here. We only ever hear 3 melodies in this song. And Schubert organizes them in different ways, but that's all we hear. And the lover himself sings along with this organ grinder so that his vocal part has really narrowed. It's become so melodically depleted. He no longer has the energy to be expressive or improvisatory. Now he's just the victim of mechanical repetition. And Michael does a great job of that in that performance. You can hear the organ grinder there. So the question of what that all means has occupied lots of scholars. There's lots of interesting perspectives. Some people argue that there is no Leiermann, that this is just a psychic projection of the protagonist, a doppelganger. That's a real romantic term, like a double. It's a representation of his mental breakdown, like he's now just hallucinating, wandering off. Other critics talk about the organ grinder as a medieval instrument, which was called the hurdy-gurdy, of course, as though the retreating of consciousness of the lover is also a temporal regression, a return to a kind of medieval space. And so as the song comes to an end, the lover just wanders off into the snow-filled woods and dies, which is maybe a commentary on Schubert's own state of mind. 1828, he is slowly and painfully and inevitably dying of syphilis. He is the lover wandering off to hypothermia and death in this song. Yeah.
And how would you relate Der Leiermann to Der Tod und das Mädchen, which we'll hear next?
Also a song about youthful demise. Also a song in which there are very few musical materials that are so beautifully and strategically used by Schubert. And again, an example of Schubert just hovering between genres. Is this a song? Is it a piece of recitative? Is it a little piece of an opera? We don't know. And so the state of death itself, mysterious and liminal, is also the state of compositional reality in the song. Yeah.
Wow. Let us listen to Der Tod und das Mädchen. And Hannah is, of course, das Mädchen, and Jonathan personifies the voice of death.
Deine Hand, du schön und zart Gebild, bin Freund und komme nicht zu strafen. Sei gutes Mus, ich bin nicht wild, sollst sanft in meinen Armen schlafen.
Thank you all so much for all these beautiful performances that we have had the great privilege to enjoy and to share this evening. Jonathan, what kind of emotional resonance does Der Tod und das Mädchen and even this evening's songs have for you?
Well, I think they are great choices for Halloween weekend. And I mean, in all seriousness, I think that they are really poignant right now, as we as a society, as a globe, are dealing with this pandemic and this specter of illness and death that I think has touched almost all of us, if not, directly than one or two or three people removed. And there's something really thought-provoking about the idea of Der Tod und das Mädchen, of death and the young woman, the maiden. not death und die alte Frau, not death and the old woman. And it's, you know, it's relevant. People are succumbing to this virus of all ages, and not just the virus, but, you know, the challenges facing us across the world and in our own country. You know, they can have the effect of cutting life short for people. And I think that there's something about the simplicity and beauty of this song that really puts into contrast or relief what those feelings are, and some of those fears that, you know, we may all be dealing with or walking around with or trying to mitigate as we move through our lives. So I'm super grateful for the opportunity to perform this music, explore this music, and to do so with such wonderful colleagues and people who are so brilliantly inspired in terms of how they think about this music, because it's giving me inspiration and ideas about how to allow it to help me process some of the grief and sadness that I think many of us have faced in the last several months.
Absolutely. I think there's lots more to talk about when we come back for the Q&A, but I wanted to just introduce our last piece for this evening, which is the Litanei auf der Fest aller Seelen. This episode premieres on November 2nd, which is All Souls Day, and this is a beautiful and contemplative prayer by Schubert for All Souls Day.
Alle Seelen reinen Himmelslicht, einst zu sehen von Angesicht, alle, die von innen scheinen. Alle Seelen ruhen in Frieden.
Thanks so much for tuning in to SalonEra. Still to come is a live Q&A with Francesca, Hannah, Michael, Jonathan, and myself. We'll start broadcasting the live Q&A just moments after this video ends, so stay put. If you're watching on salonera.org, simply refresh your browser window at the end of this video and the live stream Q&A should appear. If you are watching on Facebook or YouTube, I recommend liking or subscribing to our page so you'll definitely get notified as we get live. For the Q&A, you can write questions for any or all of this episode's artists in the comments section below, and watch the comments for a link directly to the Q&A. We'll see you there. Tune in on Monday, November 16th at 7:30 Eastern for Folk Influences, as we bring together three accomplished Baroque violinists who keep one foot firmly in the Baroque and the other just outside. Edwin Hausinger takes a deep dive into traditional Spanish folk music, and Gail Hernandez Rosa riffs on Telemann with new tunes and textures overlaid on the Baroque composer's harmonies. We're also thrilled to have David McCormick share his research on Black musicians at Thomas Jefferson's Virginia Estate, Monticello. Gail, Edwin, and David have created remotely produced collaborations especially for SalonEra, teaching each other new tunes from their own repertoires, including Celtic and Spanish folk tunes, and attempting to reconstruct the sound of a late 18th century Black string band.